Connor asked me to do a quick run around the issues on my plate at the moment. As Connor said, the Prime Minister asked me in the autumn to take on this role as a converged minister for communications technology and broadcasting. It doesn't really matter what your ministerial brief is. All public policy is framed in and around the realities of the economic climate you find yourself in. And we find ourselves in a particularly striking economic reality where there are certainly a lack of fixed points, and it's a very challenging environment in which to make forward predictions. And for many commercial businesses, they are facing unprecedented changes in their forward order books and their ability to be able to secure credit in order to continue to run their businesses. So these are challenging times. It's become a phrase that everyone uses, these are challenging times, but these are very challenging times. I have run 2 businesses in 2 recessions, and these are very different times. And we're also seeing, I think, some fundamental structural changes. I think we are. Again, people often say that, but it's worth, I think, stopping to think about what those structural changes might be. We've had an extraordinary period of global growth, and many people say to me that what that has had the consequence of doing is creating a surplus of assets in many classes and in many markets and in many categories. And what that will probably mean is that the quantity of those players will have to change, and probably the value and the price of those players will have to be repriced and rebased. That will probably mean that we will see some businesses exiting markets, and it will probably mean that there will be considerably greater pressures for, and to a degree sense in, a greater level of consolidation. And that's going to ask, I think, some pretty searching questions, both of public policy and of competition policy, not to mention the way in which companies are organised. Also, the interrelationship, I think, between the Western markets and the Eastern markets is going to change, because one of the consequences of the times we live in is that for the emerging markets, their dependency on Western demand has left them in a place that I suspect many of those countries will find challenging. So I think you will see many of those markets shift from a manufacturing focus to an infrastructure focus, which will mop up capacity for them in a way which will allow them to position themselves for economic growth. What does all of that mean if you're in the communications sector? Well, I genuinely think it's a good thing for the sector, because all of those changing realities means that many countries around the world, including our own, are looking at where future growth is going to come from. And indeed, in the PBR, pre-budget report, only last week, in fact not last week, this week, because the long-time politics only this week, the Chancellor laid out the point very clearly that we will increasingly look to sectors, particular sectors in the economy, to drive growth, of which the communications sector will be one. And that is, I think, an important and shining opportunity for the sector. And it's also an important opportunity for me, because it means that the work that we're doing, the Digital Britain report, will come at hopefully a time where people are inclined to listen to the recommendations and act upon them. The other big structural change that you're seeing has been wrought actually by digital itself, both on itself and for everyone else. Digital activity underpins a large and increasing range of innovation and competitive activity in lots of different sectors. And there is a growing body of evidence for its positive, today unevenly distributed social and economic benefits in access to discounted prices, greater educational opportunity, social mobility, and other things. But the forces that have given us significant growth and huge expansion in consumer choice, greater mobility, control, participation in and around our media, have all significantly disrupted traditional business models and funding streams. Broadly, digital is good if you're an aggregator, but not so good if you're an intermediary. Good news if you're EasyJet, bad news if you're the local travel agent. Good news for Tesco.com, bad news for the independent high street retailer. You can win as a supplier of upmarket personalised services, but a bit harder in today's climate. But digital, as a rule, tends towards commoditisation. It greatly also increases the availability of multiple copies, reduces their cost, but also the rewards for mass-produced copies of the same content or the same experience. 79 pence for an iTunes versus 9.99 for a CD. Good for consumer choice, challenging for intellectual property and rights models, even before we get to aggressive peer-to-peer file sharing and piracy issues. And most importantly, I think, and I do think this is a critical point, is the concomitant of the drive to digital, is the story of the disappearing traditional advertising pound. Back in the late 1980s, when I was coming to Manchester in the back of a Rolls-Royce, anything other than television advertising was in fact described by the media planning and buying fraternity at the time as secondary media. They meant outdoor. Today, I looked at this yesterday just to check I was right on the number, total NAR, total national advertising revenue, in real terms, so in hard cash, is 8% less than it was at the start of digital in the late 1990s. It's a phenomenal change. But the volume of impacts, as anyone in that market knows, has grown out of all proportion. So the yield per impact has fundamentally changed, and some people would argue has collapsed. For most advertising, as audiences fragment, there is still some content that is so compelling that it can buck the trend. Although the truth of the matter is that is less true in the UK broadcasting market because of the station average price share deal mechanism. A point, interestingly, that was captured at the time of the Carpenter-Grant merger, but broadcasters weren't in the market for a change to the system at the time and wanted to keep the deal that they signed up to. A little bit of history, but very relevant to those now campaigning aggressively for change. Added to fragmentation, there is migration, especially of classified advertising from traditional media to the internet, with its very different cost and price structures. For classified advertisers, the internet is a good thing. For advertiser-funded media businesses, even those who've successfully made the transition to the digital media world, it's a real challenge. Now, in my view, net-net, the benefits to us all as consumers of the drive to digital substantially outweigh some of those costs that I've just tried to lay out. But what I'm trying to do is to make sure that those costs are clear in order that we understand as we look forward to right policy what that means. So we need a clear-sighted view of some of the challenges, and what might they be? Well, some of them I think are to local and regional production, particularly journalism, particularly news gathering, and particularly news production. And this is not just an ITV phenomenon. It is seen in local radio, local press, and fledgling local internet sites too. So questions. Do we need changes to the UK framework to allow other providers who can spread their costs over a range of different media to enter the hitherto closed world of news gathering? It also, I think, needs us to reconsider changes to does an acceptable level of consolidation of businesses capable of sustaining local journalism and news gathering, is that justified? Does that require us to examine media ownership law and competition principles to think further about market definitions? Secondly are the challenges to the creation of what you might call big content, UK-originated content of medium to high production value. The total number of content producers and distributors that advertising funds may now be too high to provide a sustainable, market-led force of scale alongside the publicly funded BBC. In global markets, achieving scale UK presence and leadership may well require partnerships or even closer cooperation between the rights arms of broadcasters and independents. Thirdly, there are challenges to the current model of rights and revenue flows. If advertiser-funded first window revenues cease to be sufficient to fund content creation, either the current balance of risks and rewards would need to alter, or we need to find additional sources of value to address that deficit.